Princess Zarathel watched her husband Marcus from across the royal garden as he knelt beside a flowering bush, carefully sketching its leaves in his notebook. The afternoon sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, making him look even more like the gentle scholar she had fallen in love with 3 years ago. Marcus Chen was everything the Velthari court had not expected in a human. When the first cultural exchange had brought him to their world, the nobles had whispered about the soft-skinned aliens who supposedly conquered worlds through tricks rather than strength. They expected arrogance, maybe even hidden weapons. Instead, they got a quiet man who spent his days studying plants and writing poetry in their own language. "Your Highness," came a voice behind her. Zarathel turned to see her younger brother, Prince Kethmore, approaching, his scaled face twisted in its usual scowl. At 25, he was already a decorated warrior, his blue skin marked with the ritual scars that showed his victories in combat. "Brother," she said carefully. Kethmore had never liked Marcus, though he had never said why directly. The Velthari way was to challenge those you disliked to combat, but Marcus always found polite ways to avoid such confrontations. "I see your pet human is playing in the dirt again," Kethmore said, his voice carrying across the garden. Marcus looked up from his flowers, gave a small wave, and returned to his work. Zarathel felt her neck plates flush with anger. "Marcus is my husband and a guest of this court. You will show respect." "Respect?" Kethmore laughed, the sound harsh in the peaceful garden. "Sister, look at him. He spends his days with flowers and books. When the hunting parties go out, he stays behind. When the young warriors practice combat, he writes poems. What kind of male refuses to fight?" "A wise one," Zarathel replied. "Not everything needs to be solved with violence, Kethmore." Her brother's eyes flashed. "Everything on this world is solved with strength. It is our way. It has always been our way." He gestured toward Marcus. "Your human makes our entire court look weak. The other kingdoms whisper that the Velthari have grown soft, that we allow aliens to mock our traditions." Marcus had stopped sketching and was walking toward them, his steps careful and measured as always. He wore simple brown robes that hid his lean frame, and his hands were stained with plant juice from his studies. Everything about him spoke of gentleness and scholarly pursuit. Prince Kethmore," Marcus said with a slight bow. His voice carried no trace of the fear that most beings showed around angry Velthari warriors. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, my love," Zarathel said quickly, moving to stand beside her husband. Kethmore was just leaving, but her brother stepped forward instead, his hand moving to the ceremonial blade at his side. "Actually, human, I was hoping to speak with you." Marcus tilted his head slightly like a bird studying an interesting insect. "Of course." "What about?" "Honor," Kethmore said. 3 days ago, during the Feast of First Moon, you sat in the place of honor beside my sister. When Lord Vextar made his speech about the glorious battles our ancestors fought against the Star Devourers, you looked bored." Zarathel blinked in surprise. She remembered that feast, but she had not noticed Marcus looking bored. If anything, he had seemed very interested in the old stories about the ancient enemy that had once threatened their galaxy. "I was not bored," Marcus said simply. "I was thinking." "About what?" Kethmore demanded. "About how terrible those battles must have been for everyone involved." The prince's neck plates flared with rage. "Terrible? Those battles were glorious. Our warriors died with honor, protecting everything we hold dear." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "They died. That's always terrible, even when it's necessary." For a moment, Kethmore seemed confused by this response. The Velthari way was to meet challenge with challenge, anger with anger. Marcus's calm agreement had taken the wind from his sails, but only for a moment. "You mock our ways with your soft words," Kethmore snarled. "You sit at our table, eat our food, marry into our royal family, and you show no respect for the strength that built this kingdom." "Brother," "Enough," Zarathel warned, but Kethmore was past listening. "I challenge you." "Marcus Chen of Earth," he said, drawing his ceremonial blade with a ring of metal. "Combat. Tomorrow at dawn, in the Circle of Honor. Show this court that humans have some courage, or admit that your people are cowards who hide behind machines and tricks." The garden fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Servants who had been tending the flowers stopped their work and stared. This was not just a challenge between two males. This was a challenge to the alliance between their peoples. Zarathel felt her world tilting. Marcus would refuse, of course. He always found ways to avoid such confrontations. He would make some joke about preferring to fight weeds rather than warriors, or suggest a poetry contest instead. The court would laugh, Kethmore would be frustrated, and life would continue as normal. But Marcus was not laughing. He stood very still, looking at the blade in Kethmore's hand. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, something that made Zarathel's breath catch in her throat. It was gone so quickly she almost thought she had imagined it. "You want to fight me?" Marcus said. It was not a question. "I want to show this court what humans really are," Kethmore replied. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying the prince. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, but somehow it carried to every corner of the garden. "Very well," he said. "I accept." The words hit Zarathel like a physical blow. Around the garden, servants dropped their tools. Even Kethmore seemed surprised by the quick acceptance. "You accept?" the prince stammered. "Tomorrow at dawn," Marcus said calmly. "In the Circle of Honor. Traditional weapons and rules, I assume?" Yes, Kethmore managed. "Traditional weapons." Marcus nodded once, turned to Zarathel, and gave her the same gentle smile he had worn every day for 3 years. "I should go prepare," he said simply, and walked away toward their chambers. Zarathel stared after him, her mind spinning. In 3 years of marriage, she had never seen Marcus so much as raise his voice in anger. He had no weapons that she knew of, no training in combat. He spent his days with flowers and books and poetry. But as she replayed that moment in her mind, she remembered the look that had crossed his face when he saw Kethmore's blade. Just for an instant, just for a heartbeat, her gentle scholar husband had looked like something else entirely. Something dangerous. "Well," Kethmore said, sheathing his blade with shaking hands. That was easier than I expected." Zarathel said nothing. She was remembering other small moments now. The way Marcus sometimes paused when he heard unexpected sounds. How his eyes would sweep a room when they entered somewhere new. How he never sat with his back to a door. Small things. Things she had never really noticed before. Things that suddenly seemed very important indeed. Zarathel found Marcus in their private chambers, kneeling before a wooden chest she had never seen before. The chest itself was beautiful, made from some dark earth wood and carved with symbols she did not recognize. But it was what lay inside that made her breath catch. A sword. Not just any sword, but something that looked ancient and deadly. The blade was slightly curved, its metal so dark it seemed to drink in the light from their windows. The handle was wrapped in black cord, worn smooth by what must have been countless hands over many years. "Marcus," she whispered. "What is that?" He looked up at her, and again she saw that flicker of something in his eyes. Something that had never been there during their quiet dinners or walks through the garden. "It's called a katana," he said simply, lifting the weapon from its resting place. "It belonged to my grandfather, and his grandfather before him." The sword seemed to belong in his hands in a way that his plant specimens and poetry books never had. As he held it, his entire posture changed. His shoulders straightened, his stance widened slightly, and suddenly her gentle husband looked like someone who could kill. "I don't understand," Zarathel said, sitting heavily on their sleeping platform. "You're a scholar. You study plants and write poetry. You've never even mentioned weapons before." Marcus stood, and she watched in fascination and growing alarm as he moved through what could only be practice forms. The sword flowed around him like water, each movement precise and controlled. This was not someone who had learned to fight recently. This was someone who had been training for years. "I am a scholar," he said, not breaking his rhythm. "I do study plants. I do write poetry." He completed a complex series of movements that made the air whistle around the blade. "But that doesn't mean I've forgotten other skills." "Other skills?" Zarathel felt like she was seeing her husband for the first time. "Marcus, what aren't you telling me?" He stopped moving and looked at her directly. For a moment she thought he might tell her everything. Then his face softened, and he was her gentle Marcus again. "Everyone has a past, my love," he said, setting the sword carefully back in its chest. "Some parts are just harder to talk about than others." Before she could press him further, a servant knocked on their door. "Your Highnesses, the dawn approaches. The Circle of Honor is prepared." Zarathel's stomach clenched. In all the shock, Of discovering the sword, she had almost forgotten about the duel itself. "Marcus, you don't have to do this." Kethmore was angry, but he'll calm down. "I can speak to Father, call off the challenge." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Your brother challenged me in front of the court. To back down now would shame us both." He picked up the sword again, this time strapping it to his side like he had done it 1,000 times before. Besides, it's time some things were settled. The Circle of Honor was the oldest part of the palace, a stone amphitheater that had seen centuries of duels between Velthari warriors. As they walked down the steps toward the fighting ground, Zarathel was surprised to see how many had come to watch. The entire court seemed to be here, along with servants and guards who normally would never be allowed at such an event. News of the duel had spread quickly, the alien prince and the human scholar fighting in single combat. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Kethmore was already waiting in the circle, wearing his ceremonial armor and carrying his father's blade. He looked confident, even eager. At 30 years old, he had never lost a duel and had killed 3 enemies in real combat during border skirmishes. Against an untrained human, this should be quick. "The rules are simple," announced Master Velkoth, the weapon master who would oversee the duel. "Combat until surrender, unconsciousness, or death. Traditional weapons only. Honor to the worthy." Marcus stepped into the circle, and Zarathel heard murmurs from the crowd. He still wore his simple brown robes, looking more like he was going to tend his garden than fight for his life. The only sign of what was to come was the sword at his side. "Last chance to surrender, human," Kethmore called. "I have no wish to kill my sister's husband, but I will if you force me to." Marcus said nothing. He simply drew his sword. The change was instant and shocking. As soon as the blade was in his hands, Marcus transformed. Gone was the slouching scholar with ink-stained fingers. In his place stood a warrior, balanced on the balls of his feet, eyes focused entirely on his opponent. Kethmore noticed the change too. His confident smile faded slightly as he raised his own weapon. "Begin," Master Velkoth called. Kethmore attacked immediately, his blade whistling toward Marcus's head in a strike that had felled a dozen opponents before. It was fast, powerful, and would have killed most fighters before they could react. Marcus was not there when it arrived. He had moved sideways and forward at the same time, letting the prince's blade pass harmlessly by his shoulder, while bringing his own sword up in a counterattack that stopped just short of Kethmore's throat. The crowd gasped. Kethmore stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. "How?" he began, but Marcus was already moving. What followed was not really a fight so much as a lesson. Every attack Kethmore made was countered perfectly. Every counterattack was blocked or avoided with minimal effort. Marcus moved like he could see the future, always one step ahead of his opponent. More disturbing to Zarathel was how much Marcus seemed to know about Velthari fighting techniques. When Kethmore attempted the striking serpent form that had won him his greatest victory, Marcus countered with a move that should not have been possible, unless he knew exactly what was coming. "Fight me," Kethmore roared, sweat streaming down his scaled face. "Stop playing games." For the first time since the duel began, Marcus spoke. "I am fighting you," he said calmly, deflecting another desperate attack. "You're just not very good at it." The insult drove Kethmore into a rage. He abandoned all technique and began attacking wildly, hoping to use his superior strength and reach to overwhelm his opponent. It was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. He stepped inside Kethmore's guard, grabbed the prince's sword arm, and twisted. There was a wet popping sound as Kethmore's shoulder dislocated. The prince screamed and dropped his weapon. Before Kethmore could recover, Marcus had spun him around and driven him to his knees. The point of the katana came to rest against the base of the prince's skull, right where the spine met the brain. "Yield," Marcus said quietly. The circle was completely silent. Kethmore, one of the finest warriors of his generation, knelt defeated in the dust. Marcus stood over him like an avenging spirit, his blade steady and sure. "I yield," Kethmore whispered. Marcus stepped back and lowered his sword, but he did not sheath it. His eyes swept the crowd, and Zarathel realized he was checking for other threats, other challenges. "The duel is concluded," Master Velkoth announced, his voice shaking slightly. Honor to the victor. As Marcus finally put away his sword, Zarathel saw something in the crowd that chilled her blood. Several of the older nobles were whispering among themselves, and their expressions were not surprised or impressed. They were afraid. These were warriors who had fought in a dozen campaigns, who had seen battle and bloodshed and death, and they were looking at her gentle, scholarly husband with the same expression they might show a hungry predator. What exactly had she married? That night Zarathel waited until the palace was quiet before confronting her husband. She found him in their chambers, cleaning his sword with the careful attention of someone who had done it many times before. "No more lies," she said, closing the door behind her. "I want to know who you really are." Marcus looked up from his blade, and for a moment she thought he would try to deflect her questions again. Then he sighed and set the sword aside. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a while." She remained standing, arms crossed. "Start with the obvious question. You're not really a scholar, are you?" "I am a scholar," Marcus said carefully. "I have 3 degrees in xenobiology from Earth's finest universities. I really do love studying alien plant life, and I really do write poetry in your language." He met her eyes. "But that's not all I am. What else?" Marcus stood and began pacing, something she had never seen him do before. "Before I came here, I served in a military unit called the Void Stalkers. We were specialists. Specialists in what? Killing things that shouldn't exist." The simple word sent a chill down Zarathel's spine. "What kind of things?" Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Have you ever heard of the Devourers outside of your ancient stories?" Zarathel blinked in surprise. The Devourers were legends, bogeymen from the old tales used to frighten children. They're myths, stories told around fires to make people appreciate peace. "They're not myths," Marcus said quietly. "They're real and they're coming back." He moved to the window and stared out at the stars. 15 years ago, human deep space sensors detected something moving in the void between galaxies. Something big, something that matched the energy signatures from the old Velthari records of the Devourer Wars. "That's impossible," Zarathel said. But even as she spoke, she remembered something. 2 months ago, there had been whispered conversations among her father's advisors about ships disappearing near the outer rim. "Trade convoys that simply vanished without sending distress signals, is it?" Marcus asked. "When was the last time you heard from the mining colonies in the Kethvar system?" Zarathel's blood went cold. The Kethvar system had gone silent 3 weeks ago. The official explanation was equipment failure, but now she wondered. "My unit was sent to investigate the first disappearances," Marcus continued. "What we found." He trailed off, staring at something she couldn't see. "Let's just say the old stories about devourers feeding on entire worlds weren't exaggerated." He turned back to her, and she saw scars she had never noticed before. Thin white lines across his hands and arms, the kind that came from claws and energy weapons. "The Void Stalkers were formed to fight things that regular armies couldn't handle," he said. "Creatures that adapted to conventional tactics, that learned from every battle and became stronger. We had to be unpredictable, had to think in ways that even other humans couldn't follow." "How many of you were there?" "In my unit, 12. "In the whole program?" Marcus shrugged. "Maybe 100 scattered across the galaxy. All of us with the same mission: embed ourselves in alien societies, learn their weaknesses and strengths, and prepare for the day the Devourers returned." Zarathel sank onto their sleeping platform as the implications hit her. "You came here to spy on us." "I came here to protect you," Marcus said firmly. "The Velthari are warriors, but you've been fighting each other for so long that you've forgotten how to fight a real enemy. Your tactics are predictable. Your strategies are based on honor rather than efficiency. Against the Devourers, that would get you all killed." "So you married me as part of your mission?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "It started that way," he admitted. "Getting close to the royal family was the fastest way to understand your people's military capabilities. But Zarathel," he knelt beside her, taking her hands in his scarred ones, "I fell in love with you. Really, truly fell in love. That was never part of the plan." She wanted to pull away, wanted to rage at him for the deception, but looking into his eyes, she could see the truth of his words. "Whatever else he might be, his love for her was real. What else haven't you told me?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. There are other humans on your world, and on most of the major worlds in this sector, all of them playing roles, all of them gathering information and preparing defenses. How many? On Velthar? Maybe 20. The spice merchant who supplies your kitchens is actually a demolitions expert. The human artist who painted the murals in your father's throne room is a sniper who could kill someone from 3 kilometers away. The engineer who designed your new communication array can hack any computer system ever built. Zarathel's head was spinning. The friendly humans we've welcomed into our society are all warriors? The best humanity has to offer, Marcus confirmed. We've been preparing for this war for over a decade. A new thought occurred to her, one that made her stomach clench with fear. Marcus, if the Devourers are real, if they're coming back, where are they now? Before he could answer, alarms began wailing throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed their chamber in red, and they could hear guards running in the corridors outside. Marcus was on his feet instantly, his demeanor shifting back to that of a warrior. That's the deep space alert, he said grimly. Zarathel's personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from the military command center. She read it quickly, then looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. A massive fleet just appeared at the edge of our system, she whispered. Ships like nothing in our databases. They're not responding to hails, and they're moving toward the inner planets. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, looking older than she had ever seen him. When he opened them again, they were filled with a terrible certainty. They're here, he said simply. He moved to their window and activated a hidden panel she had never known existed. Inside was a communication device unlike anything in Velthari technology. Go 7 to all stalker units, he spoke into the device. The package has arrived. Repeat, the package has arrived. Activate all protocols. Responses came back immediately in languages Zarathel didn't recognize. Human voices, calm and professional, reporting readiness from across the planet. Marcus, she said, fear making her voice shake. What's going to happen now? He turned to her, and for the first time since she had known him, her gentle husband looked like exactly what he was, one of humanity's deadliest warriors, preparing for a war that would decide the fate of entire civilizations. Now, he said, reaching for his sword, you're going to see what humans are really capable of when someone threatens the people we love. Outside their window, the first Devourer ships began entering the atmosphere, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. The throne room had become a war council, filled with Velthari military commanders shouting over each other as reports flooded in from across the system. 3 outer colonies had already gone silent. The defense fleet was moving to intercept, but everyone could see the fear in their eyes. Zarathel stood beside her father's throne, watching her husband transform before her eyes. Marcus had shed his scholar's robes for black military clothing that seemed to absorb light. Weapons she had never seen before appeared from hidden compartments in their chambers, devices that hummed with dangerous energy. They're not responding to any of our communication attempts, reported Admiral Thexkar, the kingdom's highest military commander. Their ships don't match any design in our databases. They're just wrong somehow. Marcus stepped forward, and Zarathel noticed how the Velthari commanders unconsciously made room for him. Word of his victory over Prince Kethmore had spread, along with whispered speculations about what he really was. May I see the tactical display? Marcus asked politely. King Velthorn, Zarathel's father, gestured toward the holographic star map floating in the center of the room. Marcus studied it for a moment, his expression growing darker. They're not attacking randomly, he said. Look at the pattern. They hit the mining colonies first, places with heavy industrial equipment. Then the agricultural worlds. They're taking resources before they take population centers. What does that mean? The king asked. It means they're not just here to destroy, Marcus replied. They're here to feed and to grow. Admiral Thexkar stepped closer to the display. Our fleet is positioned here, along the traditional defensive line. If we can hold them at the Kethmore Nebula, we might be able to buy time for reinforcements from the other kingdoms. Marcus shook his head. That won't work. Excuse me? The Admiral's neck plates flared with indignation. I've been fighting battles since before you were born, human. Against other Velthari, Marcus said calmly. These aren't Velthari. They learn from every engagement. Every tactic you use against them, they'll adapt to and counter. By the time your reinforcements arrive, the Devourers will be ready for them too. Then what do you suggest? King Velthorn asked. Marcus activated his communication device again. Go 7 to all units. Begin Phase 2. Repeat. Begin Phase 2. Immediately, new signals appeared on the tactical display. Ships that had been hidden, stations that had been camouflaged, weapon platforms that had been disguised as civilian installations. In moments, the defense network had doubled in size. The Velthari commanders stared in shock. How long have you been building this? Admiral Thexkar demanded. 10 years, Marcus replied. We've been preparing for this day since the first signs appeared. Another human voice came through the communication system. Ghost 7, this is Ghost 3. Devourer Advance Fleet is entering the atmosphere of Velthar Prime. Estimate 12 hours until they reach the capital. Understood. Ghost 3. Begin harassment protocols. On the tactical display, small craft began launching from hidden bases across the planet. They moved in patterns that seemed random, but struck the Devourer ships with surgical precision before vanishing again. What are they doing? Zarathel asked. Making noise, Marcus replied. Devourers adapt to consistent patterns, but they have trouble with pure chaos. Human tactics don't follow logical progressions. We do things that don't make sense, even to ourselves sometimes. As if to prove his point, one of the human fighters flew directly at a massive Devourer ship, fired all its weapons at once, then ejected the pilot and crashed the empty craft into the enemy vessel. It was completely insane and tactically meaningless. It was also completely effective. The Devourer ship, clearly built to handle conventional attacks, seemed confused by the suicidal assault. Its defensive systems couldn't predict what the humans would do next because the humans weren't following any predictable strategy. This is madness, Admiral Thexkar muttered. Yes, Marcus agreed. That's the point. Devourers can't adapt to madness because there's nothing logical to adapt to. The communication system crackled again. Ghost 7, we have a problem. The main Devourer fleet is accelerating. They're going to reach the inner system in 6 hours instead of 12. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. When he opened them, Zarathel saw a cold calculation that frightened her. All units, this is Ghost 7. We're moving to Phase 3 early. Repeat, Phase 3 is now active. What's Phase 3? King Velthorn asked. Marcus looked directly at him. We stop hiding. Across the planet, human agents began revealing themselves. The spice merchant shed his disguise and started coordinating supply lines for a war effort that had been planned for years. The artist put down her brushes and picked up a sniper rifle that could punch through starship armor. The engineer began activating weapon systems that had been built into the planet's infrastructure. But it was more than just individual agents. Entire installations that the Velthari had thought were civilian projects revealed their true purpose. The new communication array became a planetary defense cannon. The expanded spaceport began launching fighters that had been hidden in cargo containers. Even the recent improvements to the palace's foundation turned out to be a command bunker capable of coordinating a system-wide defense. Impossible, whispered Admiral Thexkar. We would have noticed construction on this scale. You did notice, Marcus said. We just made sure you thought it was something else. Humans are very good at making people see what they want to see. Princess Zarathel watched her husband coordinate a defense that spanned multiple worlds, and realized that everything she had known about him was both true and completely inadequate. He really was a scholar who loved plants and poetry. He was also one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. The Devourer main fleet is entering weapons range, came another report. All Ghost units, prepare for final engagement, Marcus commanded. Remember, we don't need to win. We just need to make them think twice about easy targets. That's your plan? Admiral Thexkar demanded. Make them think twice? Marcus smiled, and it was not a gentle expression. Admiral, humans have been the galaxy's apex predators for longer than your people have had spaceflight. We just usually don't advertise the fact. But when someone threatens our families, he gestured to the tactical display, where human ships were engaging Devourer vessels in ways that seemed impossible. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. When someone threatens our families, Marcus continued, we remember why the rest of the galaxy used to be afraid of us. On the display, the first Devourer ships began to retreat, not destroyed but confused and damaged by tactics they couldn't understand or counter. Zarathel realized that her husband had been right about one thing. She was about to see what humans were really capable of, and it was terrifying. The battle raged for 18 hours. From the command center deep beneath the palace, Zarathel watched her understanding of the galaxy crumble and rebuild itself around a single, stunning truth. Humanity had been playing a much longer game than anyone had realized. The Devourer fleet, which should have swept through the Velthari system like a plague, found itself fighting an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. Human ships would attack in formations that made no tactical sense, then suddenly shift to strategies so brilliant they seemed impossible. Weapons that appeared primitive would reveal hidden capabilities that could cripple ships 10 times their size. Ghost 7, this is Ghost 12, came a voice through Marcus's communicator. The main Devourer ship is trying to adapt to our randomness protocols. It's learning. Marcus nodded grimly. Understood. All units switch to Pattern Omega. Human crews only. What's Pattern Omega? Zarathel asked. Her husband's face was grim. Something we hoped we'd never have to use. On the tactical display, the human ships began moving in ways that defied not just logic, but basic survival instinct. They flew directly into crossfires, rammed ships larger than themselves, and made tactical decisions that seemed designed to get them killed. But somehow, it worked. The Devourer ships, built to counter rational strategies, couldn't predict what the humans would do because the humans were actively choosing the worst possible options and making them work through sheer bloody-minded determination. They're insane, Admiral Thexkar muttered, watching a human fighter pilot eject from his ship, spacewalk to a Devourer vessel, and plant explosives before stealing an enemy fighter to escape. Yes, Marcus agreed. We are, but Zarathel could see the cost. Human casualties were mounting, and while their chaotic tactics were effective, they weren't sustainable. The Devourers were beginning to adapt even to insanity, finding patterns in the chaos. Marcus, she said quietly, you're losing. He looked at her, and she saw something she had never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her people, for everything they had built together. I know, he said simply. Then his communicator crackled with a new voice. Ghost 7, this is Admiral Chen. 7th Fleet is entering the system. Marcus's head snapped up. Sarah, what are you doing here? My job, came the reply. All units, this is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We are taking command of this engagement. On the tactical display, new ships began appearing. Not the handful of hidden human vessels that had been fighting for hours, but an entire fleet of warships, real military vessels with the firepower to level planets. King Velthorn stared at the display in shock. There are hundreds of them. Where did they come from? They've been waiting in dark space for months, Marcus replied, his relief obvious. We knew the Voidstalkers might not be enough if the Devourers came in force. Admiral Chen's voice filled the command center. All Devourer vessels, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. You have entered sovereign space and attacked our allies. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The Devourer response was predictable. They ignored the warning and pressed their attack. What happened next would be talked about in Velthari military academies for generations. The human fleet didn't engage in the chaotic, seemingly random tactics the Voidstalkers had been using. Instead, they fought with cold, terrifying efficiency. Every shot was precisely placed, every maneuver calculated for maximum effect. They moved like a single organism, each ship perfectly coordinated with the others. But more importantly, they fought angry. Zarathel had seen Velthari warriors in rage before, but this was different. This was the fury of beings who had crossed the galaxy to protect their friends, who had spent years preparing for this moment, who would rather die than let the Devourers take one more world. The largest Devourer ship, a biomechanical monstrosity the size of a small moon, found itself surrounded by human vessels that hammered it with weapons that seemed to violate physics. When its defenses adapted to energy weapons, the humans switched to kinetic rounds. When it countered those, they used exotic matter that ate through its hull like acid. Ghost 7, Admiral Chen's voice came through the communicator. We're going to board the command ship. Can you get us inside their defenses? Marcus looked at Zarathel, then at her father. Your Majesty, I need to go. Go where? King Velthorn demanded. To end this. Marcus was already moving toward the exit. The Devourers have a hive mind structure. Kill the central intelligence and the rest of the fleet becomes just ships. You can't, Zarathel said, grabbing his arm. It's suicide. Marcus stopped and looked at her with infinite gentleness. For a moment he was the scholar she had married again, the man who wrote poetry and studied flowers and made her laugh with stories about his homeworld. "I love you," he said simply. "More than duty, more than mission, more than my own life. That's why I have to do this." He kissed her, soft and brief, then pulled away before she could stop him. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "you should know by now that humans are very hard to kill." An hour later, Zarathel watched on the tactical display as Marcus and a team of human commandos fought their way through the Devourer command ship. The video feeds showed corridors filled with creatures out of nightmare, but the humans moved through them like they were born for this kind of warfare. When they reached the Central Intelligence, a massive organic computer that pulsed with malevolent life, Marcus drew his katana one last time. "For my wife," he said quietly, and drove the blade into the creature's core. The effect was immediate. Across the system, Devourer ships stopped moving in coordination. Some fled immediately, others simply drifted dead in space. The invasion was over. 3 days later, as cleanup operations continued across the system, Zarathel found Marcus in their garden. He was kneeling beside the same flowering bush where this had all started, carefully tending the plants with bandaged hands. "So," she said, sitting beside him, "what happens now?" Marcus looked up from his flowers and she saw that he was her gentle scholar again. The warrior was still there. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he carried himself, but it was contained, controlled, waiting for the next time it was needed. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. The Devourers won't be back for generations, if ever, and next time the galaxy will be ready for them." "And us?" she asked. "What happens to us?" Marcus smiled, and it was the same gentle expression that had won her heart 3 years ago. "I go back to studying plants and writing poetry. You go back to being the most beautiful princess in the galaxy, and we both pretend that this was all just a very strange dream." "Will anyone believe that?" "The ones who need to will," Marcus said. "Humans are very good at helping people believe what they want to believe." Zarathel laughed and realized that she loved him more now than ever. Not despite the warrior he was, but because of it. Because he was someone who could save the galaxy and still remember to water her flowers. "Marcus," she said. "Yes?" "Next time you have to save the universe, warn me first. I want to help." He looked at her with surprise, then smiled wider than she had ever seen. "I love you too," he said. And in the garden where a scholar tended his plants, where a princess learned that gentleness and strength could exist in the same heart, they began planning for whatever tomorrow might bring. After all, the galaxy was a dangerous place, but it was their galaxy now,